Okay, so we did this video a couple of months ago called Phil Collins This or That, where I threw up two choices on the screen and you had to quickly pick which one you prefer. 80s ballads Phil Collins or 70s prog rock Phil Collins. Anyway, surprisingly, that video did really well. So I thought it'd be fun if we did one for Genesis this week. So I'm going to put up two options on the screen and you have to pick which one you prefer. You got to do it as quickly as possible. Makes sense? And it'd be fun if you could open up the comments tab on YouTube right now and write down your answers for each one. So at the end of this video, I can see what everyone picked. I'm just going to kind of go off the cuff here. I made these options back when we did the Phil Collins thing, so I kind of forget what they are. So I'm going to try to spontaneously answer as quickly as possible. I think the gun to the head approach, like your gut answer, is probably the most honest answer. So make sure you follow along and write down your list and then leave them in the comments below so I know how we're alike or how we differ. Okay, makes sense? Here we go. Number one. Genesis openers or closers? Okay, so Genesis openers or closers. So openers would be things like Watcher of the Skies, Invisible Touch, Mama, No Son of Mine, the stuff. And closers, of course, we have It's Gonna Get Better, I think. Is that a closer or is it Silver Rainbow? Yeah, it's Gonna Get Better, Fading Lights, Supper's Ready, I guess, technically. Los Endos, The Brazilian. Okay, so you know that. So enders or closers, if you had to pick one, which one is better or which one do you prefer? I think I'll go with closers because of Fading Lights and Los Endos. I think those are the two best. Closers, yeah, I mean, openers are good too. Like, we did two videos on the best Genesis openers and the best Genesis closers. And I think it's really hard to make that list because there's so many great ones. Like Mama's great, No Son of Mine's great, but I really like It's Gonna Get Better and I really like Fading Lights. So yeah. And I definitely like The Brazilian better than I like Invisible Touch. So I'm going with closers. That's my pick. Number two. Foxtrot or Nursery Crime? Whoa, we're getting dark right off the top here. I just did a drive and a long drive by myself for a couple hours. And so I wanted to listen to Foxtrot front to back and really just listen to it as an album, which is something it's hard to do nowadays. Even on vinyl, you have to get up and flip the record and you have to hope that nobody is in the living room bothering you during that moment. So I was on a drive by myself and I was able to listen to Foxtrot front to back. I have some opinions we'll talk about another day, but just because of that experience, I'm going to pick Foxtrot. I think a lot of people pick Foxtrot because of Supper's Ready. The musical box has been growing on me, but yeah, I'm going to go with Foxtrot. Okay. Bald Peter, right now, or shaved Peter? So unintentionally bald, intentionally bald. Remember when he did that thing? That's so weird. This is a tough one. I think his look is great now. He's kind of stayed classic. The progression of hair between Peter and Phil. I mean, Peter and Phil are so alike, right? We talked about this on a video a couple weeks ago. They're so similar. It's bizarre. But the fact that they ended their career dressing the same and being bald, it's kind of funny. Anyway, I'm going to go with the early shaved Peter. I think that was a really bold look. Especially, I think if he knew he was going to go bald later in life, he probably would have hung on to that hair longer and not intentionally shaved that V. It's like an inverted receding hairline. So I'm going with shaved. Next up is Calling All Stations or From Genesis to Revelation. So basically the bookends of the catalog, right? And a lot of people, including the band, has kind of quietly cut off those bookends, talked about Calling All Stations as being kind of like an appendix, and same thing with From Genesis to Revelation, because it was a sound that they weren't happy with, strings and production that they weren't happy with, and just a type of songwriting that they would no longer do. They were copying other people. Trespass is really kind of the start of the band that we know. But I disagree with that mentality on the other end. I disagree that Calling All Stations is not the band that we know. And so I'm picking Calling All Stations by a mile. I really do like that album. I did a review on it. When I did a review, somebody in the comments left a hilarious comment that there is this kind of thought that it's maybe they should have renamed the band and maybe they would have had more success if they didn't have that baggage of where's Phil Collins. And Mike is a successful songwriter. So is Tony. Tony does incredible soundscapes. And then Ray's voice was really, really good. So had they just renamed themselves and presented themselves in the late 90s as just another grunge band, they could have done better. And so somebody left a comment that they should have named themselves Exodus. And I think that's actually really genius. I really think that they should have rebranded as Exodus. I think there was just too much thought that the name Genesis carried so much and would just like instantly sell records, whether there was Phil or not. So anyway, that's funny. I'm going with Calling All Stations by a mile. Love that record. Next up, Chester or Daryl. Okay, so these are like the add-on guys, right? And whenever you see press photos from like the Way We Walk tours, like they're involved in all of the press photos, which is really nice. This is like kind of a sad story. I mean, Daryl actually got a lot more studio time than Chester because Daryl played on all of Phil's records, or a lot of Phil's records. And Daryl was at all of Phil's shows and tours, I believe, whereas Chester was kind of here and there. I'm picking Chester just because I got to chat with him this year, and it was a highlight of my year and a highlight of my life. And so I'm picking Chester. But Daryl, if you're watching, and I know you are, I can see you there, I want you to come on the show. So the only reason I'm picking Chester over you is because you haven't come on the show yet. So come on the show, let us chat about guitars, and then I'll pick you next time. But yeah, I'm going with Daryl. Sorry, I'm going with Chester. I really do like both, though. I think they're great. I think they're so much fun. And it's so weird, right? That they, I get it. When the three kind of narrow down to three, you don't want to split the profits more. You get the hired guns. People do this all the time now. People do it all the time. Okay, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, disc 1 or disc 2? That's an interesting one. Disc 1 or disc 2? Disc 1 is kind of like the, honestly, I was telling you a little bit about how I spent that time listening to Foxtrot front to back alone, no interruptions. It was a really important moment for me, and it's something I feel like everyone should do with every album, just especially in this day and age of singles, streaming, and playlists. This is something I need to do with The Lamb. I also need a really good copy of it on vinyl, like a new copy. Maybe I'll get that Atlantic copy if it's like 4 discs, maybe, I think. Although that'd be a lot of flipping sides to be able to enjoy it all the way through. But maybe I'll have another big drive coming up, and I really, maybe I'll do The Lamb this time. The reason I'm saying all this is because I feel like I don't have good authority on this record. I feel like I haven't adopted it as a record for me in my life that I know really well to speak to it. So let's talk about disc 1. Disc 1 is a little bit more the hits, right? The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Counting Out Time, Carpet Crawlers, back in New York City, a lot of the live staples, In the Cage as well. So I think that's where you have like kind of the heavy part of the record, and then the back half of the record is a little bit more experimental, a little bit less accessible for people. I don't know, where is the theory? I mean, there's people who are deeper into the Genesis lore than me, but like, where is the mentality of like, should this have been not a double album? Double albums were kind of the thing to do back then. It's maybe what got it so much attention. But like, if we had stripped away some of the fillers, some of the, made it a little more lean, would this be a better record? I'm asking that question. I'm not suggesting it. I'm just asking that question. But for this exercise here, just to be different, I'm going to pick disc 2 because I lean towards more of the interesting stuff and the experimental stuff. And it is probably my favorite song on this record, aside from Carpet Crawlers. So I'm going to pick the second disc. I think Anyway is really good too. That's a really nice song. Yeah, I'm going to spend some time with this record. Next up, The Last Domino or 2007 Turn It On Again tour. This is really difficult. Oh my gosh. I think a lot of people would say 2007. I'm going to say 2007, but with a caveat. So the 2007 tour was incredible because we had Chester, right? And that's really cool. And Nick was amazing, and Nick was so much fun and super special. So I think that those kind of cancel each other out, but it was kind of Chester's last outing, before that falling out. So that's really special. It's also like when his voice was incredible. Although I think they were still taking things down a key a little bit, but his voice was great. Physically, he was running around the stage. It was very much like The Way We Walk, but just a little bit with a lot more old stuff, a little bit like broader catalog and a little bit more relaxed. Phil was great on drums as well. And then, of course, the set list for that, I think, was phenomenal. And I listened to a lot of shows over the years, and I really do think it's like one of the best set lists. To have songs like Ripples and Los Endos, but also to have, the hits, I think is really cool. And that opening sequence of Behind the Lines into Turn It On Again, which would later become Duke's End, I think it was, or into Turn It On Again. I feel like the domino was just a recycle, like a just sort of recycle of the 2007 set list, which I get. It was kind of just like a little bit more of a victory lap. Obviously, there's a lot of issues with the last domino with Phil's health and Phil sitting down in a chair. It was kind of awkward. However, the progression in technology and outdoor shows are difficult, especially if you have bad seats. I had bad seats in 2007, so it was really far. There's a vibe to it, but at the same time, indoor shows, you can hear better and you can see better. They can control the environment better. And the screens on the last domino were insane. The technology in like LED and the type of like vivid screens that they had. I mean, I had great seats in the last domino, but didn't matter. I could have been anywhere and you could see so much on the screen. The other thing about the last domino that's special is that it was the end, and it was like, I mean, a lot of people criticize the fact that they went out there with Phil's voice and Phil sitting in a chair, but it's like, I don't know, like to me, if like your grandparents were sick, would you not invite them to Christmas? Just because they're not doing well, they're not the same, they're in a wheelchair and they're not speaking very clearly. Would you like not invite them to Christmas? It's like, no, of course, that's your family. Like, that's not the way you remember them when you were a kid, but they're still family. So that's kind of how I viewed the last domino, is like, this is not the same as 2007. It's not the same as 92. It's not the same as the 70s and 80s, but it's still family. It's still the people that I grew up with. There's this weird notion that us normal people have of celebrities, that they're supposed to stay frozen in time from the era that we fell in love with them. And that's why a lot of people get plastic surgery. Anyway, I'm going with 2007. Great set list. My biggest regret with 2007 is I didn't realize that would be it, that nobody knew that Phil's health would decline. And I just regret not appreciating what I was witnessing at the time. Okay, Illegal Alien or Whodunit? I think I'm actually coming around on Illegal Alien. And I've been working on a song review for Illegal Alien to kind of like, for once and for all, like talk about this song and in the modern era and get it out in the open and talk about it. And I really, there's a lyric that I'm going to kind of base my review off of, the line, consideration for your fellow man. And I just thought it's an interesting, I find that both songs are obnoxious. And if I'm listening to both of these records, which I actually think are good records, these are moments, anything she does is similar too, where it's just like takes me out of the moment, takes me out of the record. It's just like an intermission that I find goofy. And I really would have loved to come out of Home by the Seas and gone into maybe a ballad, or gone into maybe like something just more relaxed, like Taking It All Too Hard. And then, I think maybe an instrumental or something. I just wish this wasn't on the record. I know that they were doing a goofy song on every album, and it made for great music videos. It made for funny moments live, and it really showcased the fact that these guys don't take themselves seriously. And that's why they did funny songs from, basically Shapes to the end, not including Calling All Stations. So Whodunit, I've talked about before, and it's like, I find it musically obnoxious, like just difficult to listen to, especially if you've listened to the live version. I have an audience recording of the live version. And just like when Phil gets into that repetitive motion, I mean, it is like, it'll kill you. It'll really kill you. The studio version, it's fine. Every time it starts, I'm like, oh, this is cool. This is actually better than I remember. And then the song gets going and you're like, no, it's not great. I guess for this exercise, even though I'm coming around on Illegal Alien slightly musically and I'm really understanding the original intent of the lyrics, but I'm going to pick Whodunit from this. I'm curious what you pick. It's the lesser of two evils. Honestly, it's like dying by fire or dying by drowning. Okay, the Mellotron or the ARP? Oh man, this is easy for me. The ARP. I really love when the synths came along, and when we moved away from kind of organs and the Mellotron, because even though the Mellotron was cool for a time, it feels dated now, and people are actually bringing it back. There's modern Mellotrons being used, so people are bringing it back and using it more. It's a very expensive unit. It's temperamental, but to me, it's like a little bit dated. And what I loved about Tony's synths like the ARP, and you can also hear it in his solo song, "This Is Love," I think. It cuts through the mix. You know what I mean? And it makes all of their mixes a lot more brassy and edgy and sharp sounding, not like sharp versus flat sounding, but just like really nice edge to it, you know? So it's what I love about like some of the music from Wind and Wuthering and onward. You just hear like so much more clarity in the synthesizers, that whereas organs and pianos and mellotrons were more grainy, like just harder to cut through the mix. It's still true today with pianos. Like a piano is very hard to cut through the mix. Even the electric piano, the CP70 that Tony used for so long, it was really just a bed. It was very rarely was it like up front in your face. Anyway, I'll go with the ARP there. Speaking of Tony, Curious Feeling or Small Creeps Day? Curious Feeling or Small Creeps Day? So Curious Feeling came first, right, in 79, and the year after was Small Creeps Day. And they're both the debut records, and both of them there are kind of like hints of Genesis. It's funny because Tony Banks has said that Mike on this record and on the next record as well, I think they put stickers on. It's like Mike Rutherford from the band Genesis, and that helps sell records. Whereas I don't think Tony did that, and maybe that prevented things. I'm going with Small Creeps Day here. I think that's a phenomenal record. I often don't think to put it on as much as I should. I think they should reissue it. I think the artwork is horrible. I blame Hypnosis. But anyway, the album is really good. It can be considered a Genesis type record. But having said that, I think Curious Feeling is probably Tony's best work. And I also think that's really beautiful. Speaking of keyboards, I think this album is very CP70 heavy, right? It has a Duke sound, it has a post, and then there were three sound. A Curious Feeling I'm talking about. It also has, I believe, the opening song is from, and then there were three, right? It's the like kind of the redux of Afterglow or Undertow. But correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's some borrowing of things happening there. The story of Small Creeps Day is interesting too. I mean, the current story, the fact that it's not on streaming platforms, and I don't think Mike is very attached to it, and I don't think he's made any kind of commitment to revisiting it or reissuing it. Whereas Tony's a little bit more involved in the studio and has opened up some of his previous stuff and reissued things, and he's a little bit more connected to his back catalog, even stuff that he's not too proud of. He still is proud in a way, whereas I think Mike is always looking forward. So we don't get to hear much from Small Creeps. Hopefully one day it gets reissued because it's really, really, really good. Really good. I'm picking that one. And I think a lot of you will as well, but I'm curious. Next up is First Home by the Sea versus Second Home by the Sea. I'm going to go with second. Yeah, the lyrics of the First Home by the Sea they don't do anything for me. They're so vivid. And they're sung so passionately, but it's about nothing. You know what I mean? It's like just a kind of a weird story. It reminds me of like that Haunted Mansion in Disney World. But I do like that. I've talked about this before on the show. I do love this 80s prog that we learned about in Abacab with the sound of the title track Abacab, and also like Dodo and a little bit in Whodunit. And then they kept kind of like pursuing that a little bit in the Second Home by the Sea with the Simmons drums and just the weird sounds, and like Tony being a little bit more aggressive with some of the keyboard sounds. And it continued into Invisible Touch with songs like The Brazilian or Tonight Tonight, and even the title track Invisible Touch. So I like 80s prog. And, we didn't get it for very long because it was gone by the time We Can't Dance came along. So other than maybe Fading Lights. But let's, so I'm going with Second Home by the Sea. Let me know what you pick. On that note, Domino 1 or Domino 2. I think they have names, right? In the Glow of the Night. And then what's the other one? Oh, man. Anyway, one of the songs is a B-side on Invisible Touch, Maxi's single, I believe. Yeah, I think for the same reason that I picked Second Home by the Sea, I'm going to pick the second Domino. It's just more exciting. It's faster. The drum sounds are really cool. It is that 80s prog sound that I was talking about. And I think it's really cool. Although I'd like the first one as well. And I mean, I don't know how many of you consider this to be two songs in the same way that Home by the Sea was two songs. I think there are some, like the original vinyl, lists it as one track, but it's calling it two tracks. Same, I think, with on the cassette. But on modern streaming platforms, I think they just call it Domino 1 and 2. So I don't know, most people just call it Domino, but there is evidence that it's, two songs. Anyway, I'm picking the second half of Domino. Let me know what you pick. Moving along, the Brazilian or do the neurotic. We're talking about, oh my gosh, we're talking about 80s prog rock a lot today. So for me, it's the Brazilian all the way. I'm not a huge fan of Do the Neurotic. It's cool. It doesn't have a very good melody, and it goes on a bit long, and it's too fast. It sounds like Jesus, He Knows Me. Did they ever talk about the fact that it was maybe reused into Jesus, He Knows Me? It just sounds similar in my ear. Yeah, I'm not crazy about it. It's the B-side on In Too Deep. It's a cool title name. I love the fact that they were so prolific for the Invisible Touch album and how they were able to maybe cut it down to just 9 songs, or 8, 9 if you split Domino in 2. But anyway, yeah, it's Do the Neurotic's cool. Like, would I have put Do the Neurotic instead of anything she does? So out of In Too Deep, into Do the Neurotic, into Domino, that would have made a little bit of a dark second half of the album, aside from throwing it all away. But yeah, that would have been kind of cool, actually. That's a little bit too, I don't know. Well, then they could have had, that would have been cool, because then it would have been Invisible Touch, Tonight, Atlantic Confusion, Into Deep. They would have had all the hits, plus throwing it all away, and then all of these kind of like more experimental songs. It would have made for like the perfect blending of like mainstream pop Genesis and like 80s prog band. So yeah, that could have been cool, but I'm going with the Brazilian. The Brazilian is phenomenal. Seconds Out, or Three Sides Live. This is a no-brainer. I mean, I'm really not a fan of Three Sides Live. I don't know why it wasn't just always Four Sides Live. Like, maybe I think the extra B-sides that they released in North America were a way to sell more copies, because it was tracks that people hadn't heard, that people didn't have access to. I've talked before about You Might Recall, and how I think that might be one of the greatest Genesis B-sides, or the greatest Genesis songs of all time. It's such a good song. But that aside, Three Sides Live is weird for me. I mean, I think all of their live albums, with the exception of 2007, When in Rome, or just Live Over Europe, with the exception of that record, all of their albums have been just kind of like a song from here, from this event, from this recording. And I always think that's problematic, because you never get to sit down and listen to a live show. And that's why we like bootlegs so much. But Seconds Out, I mean, gosh, the sound quality, the songs that they picked were so great. And yeah, and I mean, the Three Sides Live is just kind of weirdly Abacab heavy, and kind of missing some stuff from Duke in a way. But I don't know. I do like Three Sides Live. It's okay. But come on, Seconds Out. Okay, this one is a really hard one. Really hard one. Salisbury Hill or In the Air Tonight. Man, this is tough. And I think I'm going to surprise some people in my choice here, but I'm going to go with Salisbury Hill. I think it might be one of the greatest songs of all time. Let's talk about In the Air Tonight for a second. And the reason why I'm not picking it, because it's probably not my top 10 favorite Phil Collins songs. And the reason being, I understand, first of all, caveat, I understand that without In the Air Tonight, we would not have Phil Collins. We would probably not even have Genesis for as long as we did. We certainly wouldn't have this YouTube channel, and you wouldn't get to see my pretty face every single week. So we have In the Air Tonight to thank for that, or to complain too. So I have the ultimate respect for that song and what Phil did and how iconic it is. It's still iconic today, used on Monday Night Football now, which is cool-ish. The drum fill is iconic, but I just don't find it a very melodic song. Like, I don't find myself singing along with it, other than I Can Feel It Coming in the Air Tonight. It's just not a great melody. And I'm sure Phil knows that. Like, he's written way better melodies over the years. It's just not a catchy song. It's an iconic song. It has this like very long climax, but it's not a banger right out of the gate in the same way that Sioux Studio is, or the same way that Something Happened on the Way to Heaven is. It's just, I don't find myself belting this song out in the car. It's good, but it also is just kind of like a lot of buildup for that one moment. So for that reason, even though it's an iconic song, and of course I never skip it. It's such a cool opening. I don't think it's like a beautiful song in the way that Salisbury Hill is a beautiful song. It might be my favorite Peter song. It probably is my favorite Peter song. Mercy Street is very close, but Salisbury Hill is phenomenal. So I'm going with Salisbury Hill. I think it's one of the greatest songs of all time. It's also just like so bizarrely folksy and poppy. It's just a genre. It's very much like In the Air Tonight. It's a genre we did not have before. Like, is this kind of like a folk song? I don't know. Anyway, love it. And finally, the last one, and I don't want you to answer this because I don't want to know the answer. Phil era or Peter Gabriel era? The Phil era of Genesis or the Peter Gabriel era of Genesis? You know, it's pointless question because obviously this channel is about Phil, so I'm going to pick Phil. And I really do love the folksy Genesis, but I know there's a lot of you out there, and so I feel safe to say this, but there's a lot of you out there that just prefer the more in-your-face, aggressive Genesis that we would get just a little bit past, and then there were three. Like, once Phil got his confidence, not just as a frontman, but also as a songwriter, from Duke onward, there's a real like confidence happening in all of the band members, especially as they start to have individual success and they realize we can do whatever we want and we're proud to do whatever we want. And also as Phil started to write songs that he's singing as opposed to, or speaking into the songs he's singing, as opposed to singing someone else's songs. But yeah, my favorite Genesis songs are from the Phil era. As a whole, when it comes to like the hits, I think I favor Turn It On Again, That's All, Mama, No Son of Mine, like that kind of era. When it comes to like complete albums, like The Lamb as a double album or Selling England by the Pound is perfect. Trespass, I think, is perfect. When it comes to albums, I think the Peter Gabriel era was better when it came to like putting together complete albums. And that's not to say that like the 3 or 4 guys afterwards weren't good at putting together albums. I think Wind is darn near perfect. I think Duke is darn near perfect, except I just always think that as time went on, there was always like 1 or 2 songs. It was like, well, no, maybe we shouldn't have picked that. We should have done something else. So I do, anyway, I'm picking the Phil era because that's my job, but I like having both. And I've talked about this before with interviews and on the show. I like that dichotomy. I like holding 2 complete separate thoughts and 2 complete separate brains in my head at the same time, right? Just the idea that like the Peter Gabriel era is phenomenal. It's one of the best bands out there. And the Phil Collins era is phenomenal and one of the best bands out there. And there are 2 completely different brains inside this beautiful, gorgeous head. Okay, so have you been making your list? Genesis openers or closers, Foxtrot or Nursery Crime, Bald Peter or Shaved Peter, Calling All Stations or From Genesis to Revelations, Chester or Daryl, The Lamb Disc 1 or Disc 2, The Last Domino Tour or the 2007 Turn It On Again Tour, Illegal Alien or Whodunit, Mellotron or The ARP, Curious Feeling or Small Creeps Day, The First Home by the Sea or The Second Home by the Sea, Domino 1 or Domino 2, The Brazilian or Do the Neurotic, Seconds Out or 3 Sides Live, Salisbury Hill or In the Air Tonight, and Phil era or Peter era. So leave your list in the comments below. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button for exclusive videos, behind the scenes content, and to have your say on future topics before I film, have a look at our Patreon page. Thanks for watching.